As of this composition, more than 33% of the total populace is at present in isolate or confronting some sort of lockdown or limitation. So it wouldn't be astonishing to see some enduring effects from this COVID-19 pandemic. You can anticipate that new houses should contain isolate civilities, simply like the Cold War propelled, reinforced hideouts. TV shows to include coronavirus scenes, and more individuals to discard clothing subsequent to having found during their time telecommuting that less layers are more comfortable. In the past, there have been in any event 10 such social, logical, and politically extremely important occasions. The English word quarantine was at first used to depict a period in which a potential malady conveying transport was kept in disengagement. The word was first utilized in the 17th century, and it is gotten from the Italian articulation quaranta giorni, which signifies 40 days. 1. The bubonic plague flare-up that tore through the European mainland brought about one of the most amazing in mankind's history. In the mid-1300s, the plague spread through famous European urban areas, including Venice. In 1377, experts in the Republic of Ragusa, presently Dubrovnik, Croatia, enacted Trentino, which required approaching boats from plague-influenced districts to remain secluded for 30 days before anybody could debark. Inevitably, neighboring urban areas embraced the law. More than a very long while, urban areas expanded the separation time frame to 40 days, and Trentino was changed to quarantina. Nobody knows precisely why. The word quarantine has since taken on a more extensive significance. It presently alludes to different measures, from the disconnection of gatherings of individuals who are viewed as irresistible to doctors' reports gave to ships just as sterile cordons in purification. Any two-penny government deserving at least some respect realizes that scourges influence its economy over various fronts, including the rural, well-being, transportation, and outside exchange segments. Subsequently, people have reacted for quite a long time to the risk of dreariness and mortality from pestilences through facilitated sickness control procedures. The quarantine banner is one such method. The first recorded utilization of the quarantine banner is in the 18th century. During that period, signals were utilized to show that no irresistible illnesses were on approaching ocean vessels. 2. The present quarantine banner is the dark yellow worldwide sign banner. Lima, likewise called Yellow Jack. Any docking vessel under implemented quarantine is relied upon to fly this banner. Nonetheless, if the vessel is liberated from any known quarantinable sickness, they ought to demonstrate a solicitation freepraik, the permit given to enter a port, by raising a plain yellow banner. An early reference is made to quarantine in the Bible. The book of Leviticus, which was likely written in the 6th century BC, depicted a method for forestalling a pandemic under the Mosaic allotment. It directed that irresistible individuals be quarantined for some time until the clerics proclaimed them healthy. Leviticus chapter 13 verses 4-5 reads, "If the shiny spot on the skin is white but appears to be only on the surface and the hair has not turned white, the priest will quarantine the person for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest will examine it again. If, in his judgment, the sore is the same and has not spread, the priest will keep him in quarantine for another 7 days. Laws like these are typically alluded to as case laws. They are illustrative of the different kinds of genuine cases that individuals may have experienced in those days. They explicitly address issues in regards to the treatment of tainted substantial emissions, debased attire, wiped out houses, and pandemics. NASA went to exceptional lengths to isolate the 3 space explorers who came back from the extraordinary One Little Advance for Man, One Goliath Jump for Humankind Apollo 11 crucial. Prior to this crucial, including closed circle lunar route had confirmed that the moon was not made of cheddar or any such nonsense. Even along these lines, nobody at the time was certain whether the moon was sterile. Along these lines, There was a need to keep potential moon germs from desolating the Earth's populace, after the Apollo 11 case sprinkled down in the Pacific Ocean on July 24, 1969. The space travelers were met by the maritime team on the plane-carrying warship USS Hornet. The maritime team gave natural detachment pieces of clothing to the space explorers and moved them to a lunar receiving laboratory where they were separated for 3 weeks. You may imagine that was needless excess until you recollect the 1979 science fiction film Alien. In the film, a crab-like facehugger assaulted Gilbert Kane and impregnated him with an outsider undeveloped organism. Apparently alright. He approached his ordinary exercises until the newborn child outsider burst forward from his chest at supper and lethally injured him. Admittedly, the odds of these men bringing back a pathogen or the like were remote. Yet, on the off chance that they did, it was far-fetched that people would be invulnerable to it. The hazard was simply excessively high. After the Apollo 14 crucial technique was rejected as there was still no proof of life on the moon. Previously, individuals with sporadic varieties of an infection have been approached to segregate themselves when there was no outbreak. In 2007, for instance, Andrew Speaker, a legal advisor from Atlanta, was determined to have a medication-safe strain of tuberculosis. In this manner, he was told by the CDC to detach himself. From the start, he fled. In any case, he was later captured and isolated at the National Jewish Medical and Research Center in Denver. There, he was cured. Irish-conceived cook Mary Mallon, otherwise known as Typhoid Mary, contaminated more than 50 individuals with typhoid fever, which caused in any event 3 passings. Esteemed exceptionally irresistible, she had to spend a mind-blowing remainder in seclusion. After an aggregate of more than 25 years in quarantine, she passed on alone. Today, the expression, Typhoid Mary, is a saying for a transmitter of anything hurtful or unfortunate. With the bubonic plague desolating London in 1665, social distancing directions caused grounds all around England to get vacant. It appeared to be out of line around then for a great many people, yet not for a specific understudy at Trinity College, Cambridge, named Isaac Newton. Liberated from the college educational plan and his educators, Newton dove into discovery. In the year and a half he spent in confinement, Newton established the frameworks for analytics, examined optics, and confirmed that white light comprised of all segments of the obvious range. The progressive law of all-inclusive gravity was likewise conceived at his home in Woolsthorpe Manor, according to William Stukeley. Newton started to examine gravity when he observed apples continually falling directly to the ground. Newton in the long run came back to the college after the Great Plague, and he proceeded to turn into a teacher. His revelations during the quarantine, however, filled in as the establishment for probably the best logical developments. Sir Isaac Newton was only one of the numerous masters of ancient history who accomplished unimaginable things while kept to his home. Notwithstanding logical achievements during quarantines, there have been masterful ones as writing. The well-known King Lear was composed by William Shakespeare, the Bard of Avon, during the 1606 quarantine. He likewise composed Macbeth during this period, in 1816, during a cholera pandemic that influenced the greater part of Europe. 19-year-old Mary Shelley thought of the virtuoso plan to compose the principal sci-fi novel, Frankenstein, while in constrainment. All the while, she assisted with propelling the awfulness fiction idea. Frankenstein was distributed 2 years after the fact. 1793 was maybe the most horrendous year throughout the entire existence of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The mid-year was singing hot and moist, and the roads were covered with the collections of the individuals who had capitulated to the American plague, yellow fever. It struck Philadelphia hard. Specialists didn't have a clue about the root of the malady or comprehend that it was transmitted by mosquitoes just as the sickness spread. President Washington and the whole government settled on the choice to leave the city, which was the transitory capital of the U.S. back then, and similarly, King Charles II of England chose to leave London to get away from the Great Plague in 1665. Alongside his family and his whole court, the ruler left the city for Salisbury in July of that year. They moved to Oxford in September 1665 when a few instances of plague were found in Salisbury. While quarantines have demonstrated successful in halting the spread of infections in populated territories, not every person is ready for it. The morals and the adequacy of this reaction remain discussed subjects. When the SARS coronavirus broke out in Canada in 2003, the entire of Toronto was set under semi-isolate. The next year, one examination recommended that general well-being authorities ought to have concentrated exclusively on contact following rather than upheld quarantine, during the Ebola episode in West Africa in 2014. Well-being laborers coming back to America were quarantined in some U.S. states. Dr. Thomas Frieden, the CDC executive at that point, censured the states for their reaction to these well-being laborers who were going all out to handle Ebola in West Africa. Sometimes, social equality activists have fought about individuals being gathered together, uncovered, and showered without wanting to, regardless of whether it is for cleaning to forestall the spread of an illness. In any case, others have reacted by saying that nearby well-being specialists reserve the option to implement this training. There are innumerable uninhabited islands on our excellent blue planet. Some of them are unexplored, some are cordoned off to work as natural life asylums, and some have a lot grimmer explanation behind keeping individuals out. Enter the creepy Gruinard Island. After demanding this little island from its occupants during World War II, British forces began testing the feasibility of using a deadly biological weapon called anthrax on Gruinard, as they were frightened of the danger of an up-and-coming Nazi chemical attack. The Allied forces considered sending first. They tried a strain of Bacillus anthracis called Volum 14578, which was extremely serious. Every one of the 80 she put in the explosion zone for the investigation kicked the bucket inside long periods of exposure. The war finished in 1945, and the weapon was rarely utilized. The underlying proprietor at that point mentioned the arrival of his island. In any case, it had gotten dreadful, and mass cleaning would have been very costly. The Scottish island was isolated for a long time. In 1990, 4 years after a cleaning strategy, the well-being of Gruinard Island was in the long run reported by the evacuation of its notice signs.